Hello guys, we are going to go ahead and start Unit 2. Unit 2 is Economic Indicators and the Business Cycle. So an indicator is a statistic that we study to study the health of the economy. So I like to use this metaphor. When you go to the doctor for your yearly checkup, they measure your height, your weight, your BMI, your blood pressure, your oxygen level. They ask you general questions about your health. All of those are different statistics, different indicators to see if your body is healthy without having to do like major study. It's just things that can quickly be checked. So when we study the health of the economy, we treat it like it's a body. We look at certain statistics that are decently easy for the government to gather and see, is the economy healthy based on these statistics? So when the government is studying the indicators, that means that they have to do a lot of math to understand those concepts. And we're going to have to do a lot of math to understand what they are doing. So the Bureau of Labor and Statistics comes out with, at the end of every month, like the statistics for that month, and then they compile them at the end of the year. And it happens on the second Friday of every month. They come out with the previous month's statistics, and it's all these formulas I'm going to teach you this whole unit are things that you're going to have to memorize, but they're things that the government actually uses to study the health of the economy. So if they're studying all these statistics, what do they want the perfect economy to have? Like, what are their goals? So those are the three goals: to promote economic growth. When I mean growth, I mean we want our economy to grow instead of shrink, and we often use GDP as a measurement of that. Well, that's what we're going to be learning today, gross domestic product. Okay. To limit unemployment. Unemployment means those who are 16 years or older actively looking for work and unable to find work. That is a statistic we're going to be learning, and typically they want the unemployment rate to be anywhere from 3 to 5% unemployed, and that does not mean 3 to 5% of Americans don't have a job. It means 3 to 5% of people looking for a job can't find one. And then finally, to keep prices stable, and we're going to use the Consumer Price Index and the GDP deflator to measure how much the inflation or overall price levels are going up, and that reduces people's purchasing power. And typically the government likes to see no more than a 2% increase in inflation from year to year. Prices going up no more than 2%. So that's just a little glimpse into what our unit is going to be. Yesterday you learned circular flow, which is part of 2.1, but the biggest chunk of 2.1 is the gross domestic product. So there's your definition. It is the dollar value of final goods and services produced within a country in 1 year. And I'm going to go through what each of those things means here. So dollar value, meaning we're going to measure this in dollars. Every number has to have a label. It needs to be a dollar sign when it comes to gross domestic product. Final goods. Final means, so it's the dollar value of all final goods produced within a country within 1 year. Final meaning it's not a used good. It has to be new. So anything at Goodwill doesn't count. Anything that you buy on Facebook Marketplace doesn't count. And that is because used goods were already counted in the GDP the first time they were sold. So if they're counted again the second time, that's going to inflate our GDP and make it look better than it actually is. So we don't count used goods. They've already been counted in the past when they sold for the first time. We only count new goods. So that includes real estate, which is weird to think about. When you buy a house, unless you built it yourself, you're buying a used house, which is weird to think about, but a lot of the real estate market doesn't count in the GDP because we counted it the first time that it was sold. Okay. And then it also has to be a final good, not what's called an intermediate good. Intermediate means it goes into the making of the product. So the materials used to make the product, not so much the capital goods, the machinery, more like if I were making a hat, I got to think, what are the things that go into a hat? You need yarn. So yarn is purchased and then is going to be turned into a hat to be sold. So the yarn itself is not a final good. The yarn itself is an intermediate good if it's going into something to be sold. Now, if I buy yarn to make mittens for myself, I'm not selling them. So that yarn in that instance is a final good, not an intermediate good. It gets really complicated. But those are the types of like tricky things that they'll ask you in multiple choice on the AP exam. Okay. We measure GDP per country, so we can compare between countries. So we can measure the United States GDP. We can measure Kentucky's GDP. That's actually a statistic you could look up. We could measure Lawrenceburg's GDP, but we don't. And then we typically measure GDP per year. Now, like I said, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does come out with a monthly roundup, a quarterly roundup, and a yearly roundup of gross domestic product, so that we can compare month to month. And that's actually how we measure, well, in the past, how they measure recessions. The previous definition of recession, which has changed a little bit since COVID, is that it'd be 2 quarters of a year of negative GDP growth. When I say negative GDP growth, I'm going to teach you the growth formula here in a second. If we do that growth formula and found out we actually shrunk instead of grew 2 quarters of a year in a row, we would call that a recession. That's kind of the definition now. Sometimes the Bureau of Labor Statistics like strays from that definition, but that's okay. So when we're talking about GDP, gross domestic product, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about the rest of the semester. It is probably the most important statistic that I'm going to teach you, the most important indicator. And if you ever forget what it is, the name is in the definition. Gross, which means all, total. Domestic, meaning at home in our country. Product, how much crap is made. So literally the name is how much crap is made total in the United States. And that's the definition of GDP. We're going to skip that. Maybe we won't. So let me tell you, you were probably, if I were to have you in class right now and I said who has the largest GDP, you would say China and the United States, right? Because we think of those countries as countries that produce a lot. And that is what GDP is. It is a measurement of production. And it's a pretty good measurement of the country. It's a good indicator to look at. There are lots of limits to it. There are reasons why it's not the best, but there are reasons why it is. So if you think about a country that is producing a lot, they probably have a high GDP. That doesn't mean everything in their country is great. That doesn't mean all the citizens are rich and happy and healthy, but it just means that a lot of production went on. Okay. So I'm going to teach you 10,000 million formulas in this unit. And we're probably going to have little formula quizzes where I tell you, write down the growth formula, and you have to write it down and you have to memorize it, because they do not provide a formula sheet on the AP exam. They just expect that you know it. And that's what makes it so frustrating, but you can do it. So the first one I'm going to teach you, I'm going to do one example, and then you're going to go to the Google form and you're going to do the second example by yourself and input your answer. So here's the first example. If I wanted to measure growth of GDP, we calculated gross domestic product for 1 year and then the next year or years later, and we wanted to compare them. Was there growth or was there shrinkage? That's this formula. And the formula is end minus beginning divided by beginning. So I'm going to take the end year statistic, which is 5,000, and I'm going to write it out. Like if it says calculate on the AP exam, they want to see your math. So show the math. Minus beginning year divided by beginning year, all times 100. So I would show that on the AP exam. My end year minus beginning year divided by beginning year. Sometimes on the AP exam, they don't hate it if you write out the formula and then you actually do the formula. That helps them to know that you're actually doing it. But if it were to say calculate, you have to show your work, and this is how you would do it. So I write all that out, and now I have to actually do the work of solving it. By the way, you should have a calculator out today. Sorry, I didn't tell you that before. So I'm going to, if you have like a fancy dancy calculator, which you won't on the AP exam, so actually don't use your fancy calculator. We need to do this step by step. I'm going to change colors so you know. We need to remember our PEMDAS, our please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. We got to take care of these parentheses first, especially what's on the numerator. So I'm going to get rid of that. It's now 1,000. Now I have 1,000 divided by 4,000, which is going to be 1/4. So I get 0.25 all times 100. And I get 25%. And your answer is not correct unless it has a label, which is the percent, and words next to it. Like every number needs a word, which is what I've been teaching you guys. So what is this? It is the percent GDP growth for Hogwarts. Every number needs a label and every number needs a word. So in this case, it was percent. What does that mean? It means from this time to this time, the GDP grew 25% for this country, which is bananas and wouldn't actually happen. But these are just fake numbers. So I just did all that. I need you to do all that on a scrap sheet of paper for this problem. And then you're going to input your answer into the Google form. I'm going to go ahead and give you a hint. You're going to get a negative number. What does a negative growth rate mean? It means that there wasn't growth. It actually shrunk. But you would still say negative blah, blah, blah percent growth, GDP growth in Narnia or whatever. Or you could say decrease in GDP, but you have to have some sort of label that indicates it's a percentage. It has something to do with GDP for the country. So make sure you do that. And your answer on the Google form has that label. Okay, I'm moving on. So the next statistic I'm going to teach you is GDP per capita. The word per capita means per person. So per capita, we literally take the GDP for the year and we divide it by how many people were in that year. And it's basically like an average. Each person on average generated this much production of stuff. So I'm going to do one and then kind of tell you why there's some limitations to this. So my formula is you take the GDP. Hogwarts produced $55,000 worth of stuff in 2023, and there were 452 people. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to put it in my calculator, and I'm going to get 121, and I'm going to round to dollars and cents because this is a dollar amount. $121.68 GDP per capita in Hogwarts. I'm a huge Harry Potter nerd, which is why I'm doing Hogwarts and Narnia examples and silly stuff like that. So what does this $121 mean? It means in the whole year, $55,000 worth of stuff was made in Hogwarts. If we divide it by how many people are contributing to that, everybody in the population, then that means each person generated about 121. Now, this is a wildly inaccurate statistic, right? Because, like, number one, Hogwarts is not real, unfortunately. But number two, that's really, really small. Like, a country that would have that GDP is super small. The GDP of America is in the 37 trillions. And the GDP per capita in America, I want to say, is in the 88,000s right now, meaning each person is contributing about $88,000 worth of production of stuff. But you have to remember that's an average. And this is where we're going to get into the limits of discussing an indicator and saying like, oh, we can measure this and it's a perfect measurement, because it's not. If we think the average GDP per capita in America is around 88 grand, did I contribute 88 grand worth of production? Yeah, probably. I mean, I'm a teacher, I do the musical, I'm doing stuff for my family. Like, I probably did contribute that much. Did my 4-year-old son, who is also in part of the population, he'd be in the denominator in this statistic, did he contribute 88 grand worth of stuff? No, absolutely not. He did nothing this year, except for go to kindergarten. So that's why it's an average. You could also think about it the other way. Did Taylor Swift only contribute $88,000 worth of wealth and production to the United States? Heck no. She's carrying the U.S. economy on her back right now. So it's a statistic with limitations. It is an average. And that also doesn't mean that every citizen makes $88,000 in income, because that's not the average income. Now, GDP per capita is considered to be a really good measurement of standard of living within a country, but it doesn't mean that everyone has $88,000 worth of stuff to contribute, that their quality of life is high, or that the wealth per citizen or average income is that high as well. So there are limitations to GDP per capita. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to do both GDP per capita for 2 years in a row, 2014 and 2024. I'm going to figure out the GDP per capitas, and then I'm going to have you do the percent change in GDP per capita. So you're going to do the growth formula, okay? So, I'm going to take the $2,200, I already messed up, $2,200 of GDP that they made in Narnia in 2014 and divide it by how many people were there. And when I do that, I get $34.92 of just GDP. I haven't taught you real GDP yet. We'll get there. GDP per capita in 2014. Okay, I'm going to do the same over here for 2015. And that's going to be $2,400 divided by how many people is 70 people. And I get $34.28 GDP per capita in 2024. And so you're taking a look at this and you're like, oh, man, they grew, right? Yeah, growth. They grew by $400. Their GDP is going to increase. Their population also grew. So we now need to think, did they actually grow? Did they stay the same or did they shrink? Yeah, they made more, but they also had more people. So shouldn't there be even more? So that is where the growth formula that I just taught you comes into play. So you, by yourself, not with me, are going to take the end minus the beginning divided by the beginning. Notice how I'm color coding it for your good. Take all that times 100, and you are going to have a number with a percent and a label, GDP growth in Narnia. Okay? And you're going to input that into the Google form. You're welcome. Okay, we're moving on. Away from the math. Now we're going to learn about the words. I apologize, this is going to be a long time, but oh well, I didn't intend to teach this from home on a video. So let's talk about things that are not included in GDP. We already talked about intermediate goods. I'm going to glaze by that. There's that example, price of the radio or the tires inside a car. We don't count those until the final car is sold, and they are part of that, okay? What is not included in the GDP? So non-production transactions. Here's what I mean by non-production. Nothing new was made or nothing changed hands. So here's nothing new was made. Goodwill. I buy most of my clothes there. They weren't made new, so they're not counted in the GDP. They were counted the first time. They were purchased by someone else, brand new, but they're not counted now. Okay, next one. When nothing changes hands, no goods or services. If I buy stock in a company, nothing has changed hands. If I buy bonds from the government, which is a piece of paper investment, guaranteed money back, we'll get to bonds in Unit 4. Nothing really changed hands. So all the financial investment, retirement funds, those things don't count in the GDP. 401ks, Roth IRAs, college savings plans, those don't count in the GDP because nothing really changed hands. It's non-production transaction. And then finally, real estate. Real estate, if it is used, does not count in the GDP. If it's new, it does. And we'll get to what category here in a second. All right, and then we have non-market activities sometimes are illegal. So things that fly under the government's radar: drugs, prostitution, the sale of body parts on the dark web. Those are non-market activities. The government has no way of tracking them, and thus they don't get counted in the GDP. Babysitting, innocent stuff. Babysitting. I pay a teenager like Carson Snodgrass to come to my house and watch my children over the summer, that I pay her cash, right? The government's not tracking that. So the babysitting is considered to be a non-market, not counted in the GDP. And then everything we do at our house that keeps our house going, everything we do, like dishes, like laundry, like giving your spouse a haircut or something like that. Those things are not counted in the GDP. It's just like nothing changed hands. Nothing is being tracked by the government money-wise. They don't count in the GDP, but they make the world go round. So that's where we're going to get into tomorrow, limitations of GDP. It isn't the perfect, statistic or indicator, but it's pretty good. All right, 3 ways that GDP is calculated. I'm going to let you read those ways in your notes, so pause the video and do that. We are going to focus on the expenditure approach. The value added approach, just read about it. We're not going to worry about it. And then the income approach, I'll talk about it here in just a little bit. But expenditure is the one we're going to focus on and that the test focus on. So the income approach is all about the circular flow. When things were going into the factor resource market and into the product market and out of those markets, the businesses were paying the households for their labor, for their property. So in a sense, like money is changing hands constantly. And if we can track the income from the sale of property, from the sale of goods, from the sale of your labor, they're purchasing your labor, or from the sale of your like financial investments, then we can track GDP that way. So you can read that section in your notes and then use this little word bank to figure out what you think the 4 types of income from the circular flow are, or you could go back and watch that video from yesterday. But I'm going to glaze through that because we need to learn the expenditures approach, because that is what the test will test you on, and there's a formula with it. So the expenditures approach, there's like this really fancy formula, CIG X minus M. And this is like the basis of a lot of the indicators that we look at, because it's how we calculate gross domestic product. So C is consumer spending. Consumer spending is when consumers like you and I purchase things that were made in America, because it has to be a final good made in America and it has to be new. And a lot of it ends up being services. So actually this is 2/3 of the economy is just Americans buying American crap. So let me give you some examples. Like you purchase a cake from someone who makes cakes for your daughter's birthday. You go get your tires rotated. You go get a car wash. You go to the tanning salon or to the hair salon. Those are all services. And that's what we spend our money on. Fast food, oh my gosh, service, right? You're buying something on the internet that was made in America. You purchased a good. It has to be made in America, and that's where it gets really difficult to understand, and we'll get to some examples of that here in a second. All right, business investment. They call CIGX, but when you see that word investment, please do not think stocks and bonds. Nope, do not think financial stuff, because those things don't count. Don't think retirement accounts. Don't think 401ks. When you see the word investment, think business investment. So this is capital goods. Capital goods. Remember the difference between consumer and capital goods. This is capital goods. So when businesses purchase, a baker buys an oven, a farmer buys a tractor, a clothing factory buys new sewing machines. They are purchasing a tool for their business. And America produces a lot of those tools. And American businesses buy a lot of those tools, and that counts in the business investment category. One really, really funky thing that counts in the business investment category is new real estate. What? So I told you old houses don't count, and most of our houses are already used. New houses do count in the GDP, and they are not consumer spending, which is funky. They are considered to be investment spending because it's like one purchase you can make that's kind of guaranteed you're going to make more money on it later. So new real estate counts as a business investment. So that's just a side note. You're going to need it later. They love to throw that trick at you. All right, the next one would be government spending. The government is spending money on goods and services that are tangible and not transfer payments. You learned yesterday what a transfer payment is. So no stimulus checks doesn't count. No unemployment checks doesn't count. No disability checks doesn't count. So if the government is giving money to someone, does not count in the GDP. So what does count in this category? Very confusing, right? Any time that the government pays somebody to do something, so the salaries of government employees like me, depending on the government employee, this is where it gets funky. So let's forget that one. Defense spending is the hugest one, and the one that they love to do on multiple choice on the test. So when the government spends money on the military, that massively increases government spending and the GDP. Infrastructure, I'm going to spell this wrong. Infrastructure, it's spelled really weird. Roads, bridges, canals, those sort of things. Those things all count as government spending. The reason why we don't count stimulus checks, unemployment, and disability and stuff like that is because that money goes into people's bank accounts and then they go spend it usually on food. And thus, it would be counted twice. If we counted it down here and up here when they spent it, it would be counted twice. And that's why I crossed out salaries, because it gets really complex there. Some salaries count, some salaries don't. So we're just going to forget that I said that. And instead, you're going to remember those things for government spending. All right, finally, net exports. Exports, yay! They count in the GDP. Imports, Boo. They get subtracted from the GDP. So exports add to our GDP because we are producing something and selling it overseas and the money be flowing into our country. Whereas if we purchase something made outside of the United States, like all of your shirts that said made in China the other day when we checked, those things get subtracted from the GDP because our money is floating out of the country. So this gets really tricky, right? Because like if I pick up this Lego that's sitting next to my iPad at home in my kids' playroom, I'm like, oh, Lego made in China. Okay, so did that count in the GDP? No, but actually in some ways it kind of did, and that's where it gets complicated. So I'm assuming I bought this Lego at Walmart, right? Walmart bought this Lego from the Lego company who manufactures their Legos elsewhere. Is Lego company a United States company? I don't know, maybe. But they manufactured it somewhere else in a different country. They brought it into the United States, so it's an import. Going to detract from the GDP, right? But did they sell it at the cost it was to buy it? No, they sold it at a markup cost. So the import itself was subtracted from the GDP in the M category, but the markup cost, the like $2 or $3 extra that Walmart made because they sold the imported good, and the cost of putting it on the shelf and shipping it over here, those counted in possibly consumer spending and possibly in business investment spending. Oh, it gets so complicated. But for purposes of the AP test, when you see imports, it doesn't count in the GDP. Okay? So how do they actually calculate that? They just add up the categories and subtract the imports. So how much is the U.S. actually consuming of these things? I told you that consumer spending accounts for about 2/3 of the GDP, but go ahead and write these categories down like about what they are. So this would be C, this would be X minus M, this would be investment, and this would be the government. And the government takes up a big chunk too, just because of all the defense spending, infrastructure spending, that sort of stuff. So you'll notice net exports of goods and services in the United States is on the average negative. Why? Because we export little compared to how much we import. And if that M is larger, then this whole number is going to be negative. And we often have that in America, and we call that a trade deficit. We're going to get to that later on, actually, I think in Unit 6. But a trade deficit means we are importing more than we are exporting. Okay. So I've already kind of talked this through. I'm going to breeze through this. Consumer spending is made up of things that you and I purchase, durable, non-durable, and services. Durable meaning it lasts a long time, but it is still just for us and not a capital good. So furniture, dishwashers, new fridge, cars, we use them for a very long time. We fix them when they get broken. Those are durable goods, but they're not capital goods. Because we're not a business. If it were a capital good for a business, it would be in the investment category. Non-durable goods is what we love to consume. Your dish soap, your toilet paper, your food, your McDonald's, your movie ticket, those sort of things. Well, not movie ticket. That would be a service. When you pay someone to do something for you, like come clean your house, go to a movie, go to college. You are paying for a service. That is consumer spending, and Americans love to do that. We are a service economy. You go on vacation, you're paying for services out the wazoo. Hotel, airline service, car service, Uber, Lyft, those sort of things are all services we pay for. Okay, business investment, remember, does not include stocks and bonds. It's all about capital goods. I don't know why I sing that every time I do it. It does not include retirement funds. My kids 520. It's like you save for college, a 401k, a Roth IRA, none of those things. But then that weird part where it does include new houses because you'll make money on it later. And then you get this weirdness about inventories. Well, what if something is produced in 2026, but it sells in 2027, and they hold it in a storage facility because they're going to sell it later? We do count it in the year that it is produced, not the year it's sold. So if inventories are increasing, that's okay, that the GDP is still going up, but they're not selling, which is a bad indicator of business slowing down. So again, we talk about the limitations of GDP. It's not the perfect statistic. What was I going to say about that? I don't remember. Okay, moving on. So this question you need to answer in your Google form. Does the purchase of a new oven produced in America count as consumer spending or investment spending? You're going to tell me, and I'll give you a hint. It's a trick question. So your answer better be good. Moving on. That's in the Google form. Do it in the Google form. Okay, government spending. Government spending is all about the public sector. Yesterday, you learned about public versus private. Private is what we do outside of government influence, and public is what the government provides for us, like subsidies to businesses and transfer payments to citizens. So, the government often gives out money to people who need money through unemployment, disability, stimulus checks, all those examples we talked through already. Government scholarships. I went to school for free on a government scholarship. That did not count in the GDP. Why? Because the assumption is that I'm going to spend that scholarship, I'm going to, or people are going to spend that unemployment check and it will be counted on what they spend it on. And it is usually a tangible item, although not always, like some salaries count in the GDP, so it just gets really complicated. Interest payments on the national debt is the one thing on this slide I haven't covered. Our debt is massive. I'll show it to you guys in class. And we have to pay interest on that debt because we have borrowed from other countries, from banks, from U.S. citizens, and the U.S. government has to pay back the loan plus interest. And when they pay back that interest, it doesn't count in the GDP, and it's a massive chunk of money every single year. All right, and then finally, net exports. Exports minus imports is how we do this in the little formula. Exports are made here but sold to other countries. Imports are made elsewhere but sold here. And we subtract it because foreign goods don't count in our GDP. They count in the GDP of the country that has produced it. So if we buy, I'm making this up, balloons from Sweden, then Sweden gets to count those balloons in their GDP. We don't get to count it in ours. So they're shipped over to America. It gets subtracted from our GDP, sold on the shelves in America to an American customer. But we talked about the markup thing earlier, so I'm not going to get into that. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to number your paper 1 to 10, 1 to 10, number in your notes packet just off to the side. And I'm going to have you calculate the GDP. So the first thing we have to do, you're going to do this along with me, is categorize. Do these things count or not count? And if they do count, in what category do they count? So $10 for movie tickets, already talked about that. That's consumer spending. So next to number 1, right? C, consumer spending. Okay. Number 2, $5 million increase in defense expenditures. Make a guess. This is going to be government spending. Okay. Number 3, $45 for a used economic textbook. This does not count. So I'm going to cross it out, and we do not want to calculate that. All right. Ford makes a new factory, builds a new factory. We're going to assume all this is happening in the United States. That factory is a giant building full of robots. This is business investment. So we're going to count it as I. All right, $20K Toyota made in the U.S. and sold in Mexico. It's made here and sold elsewhere. That is an export. Woot, woot. All right, number 6, profit from selling stocks. Remember, stocks and bonds do not count. Why do they not count? Because whoever made that profit, good for them, wish I was them, they're going to take that $10K, they're going to go spend it somewhere else. We will count it on what they spend it on, okay? This was a non-market transaction, like nothing was changing hands, okay? All right, number 7, a $15,000 car made in the U.S. and sold in Canada. This is an export. Let me make sure I read that right. Toyota made in the U.S., sold in Mexico, car made in the U.S., sold, yeah, okay. All right, $10,000 tuition to attend college. They are paying for a service. This is a consumer good. 120 Social Security payment to Bob does not count. We will count that when he goes and spends it, when Bob spends it. And then farmer purchases a new 100K tractor. That is a business investment spending. So now here is your job. You got to add all that up. And when you add all that up, you're going to come up with a number. And Miss Keller is not going to tell you the number. Ha ha. So that is your last, let me make sure. Yep, that's your last question on the Google form. Then you're going to do your review guide for 2.1 in its entirety. And then you're done. Yay.